In this video, you will learn everything that you need to know about GraphQL. And if you don't know, GraphQL is a really awesome alternative to REST API. This is why in this video we will talk why GraphQL is better than REST API, and also we will migrate the existing REST application to GraphQL. So the first question here is, what is GraphQL? And actually there are lots of misconceptions what is GraphQL. So first of all, you must understand that this is just a layer between your frontend and your backend, which actually means this is something in between that helps us with our API. This is it. It is not a replacement for the backend, it is not a replacement for database, and it has nothing to do with frontend. So typically when we're talking about REST API, we have some API, for example, as you can see here, HTTP localhost 3012/artists, and we're making here post request, and we're providing some data inside. And this is our response that we're getting. So this is a typical example of REST API. We have some RESTful resources that we want to get. If we're talking about, for example, artist entity, typically we want to get a list of our artists, and it will be get on /artist. If we want to get a single artist, it will be /artist/id. Then we have specific requests for post and get. And it is all fine in a simple application, but it really won't fit in a big application. There you have lots of custom things. For example, just imagine that you have comments, and you can put your comments both on your artist and maybe on your post, which actually means you must generate a lot of different URLs. And actually it is not that comfortable to use. This is why people simply create custom, not RESTful API. So the first problem that I see here is REST API is not customizable enough or flexible enough when we're talking about big business applications. Second point, which is super important for me, is that we're getting zero documentation from REST API out of the box, which actually means your backend guy in your company created some new API, and you as a frontender have zero understanding what it is about. You don't know what routes are inside, and you really need to go and ask, okay, what routes did you create, what data I must provide inside. It is not documented out of the box, and we're using different additional tools to implement this functionality. And the last feature, which is the most important, there is no validation in REST API and actually no rules. And this is super bad because actually, from my perspective, this is exactly like using JavaScript in production. This is just not safe enough. We're not getting any validation, we can't throw any stuff inside, and only backend validate things. And actually all this stuff that I'm talking here we're getting out of the box with GraphQL. This is why I am such a huge fan of GraphQL. So let's look on the real example how we can convert our REST API to GraphQL so you can see all its benefits. So actually here I have a project where we used Express and MongoDB, and we implemented REST API in one of previous videos. If you are interested in seeing how we implemented this, I will leave a link in the description box below to this video. And actually, as you can see here, we have a server.js, and here we have our Express server where we attached body parser, and now here we have a bunch of requests. And as you can see, we have 5 requests for our artists. So we can get a list of artists, then an artist by ID, then we can create an artist, we can update an artist, and we can delete an artist. This is it. And we binded this application with our MongoDB, which actually means you must install MongoDB on your machine and start it. And this is exactly what we have here. In the starting of the server, we're connecting to MongoDB first, and then after this we're listening for our API. The most important point that here we splitted everything correctly. So we really used here controllers and models. For example, as you can see here, all our requests are not just written inline, but they are going in controllers. And here we have just a single artist controller, which is just a bunch of methods, which is using inside a model. For example, exports all, this is a method to get a list of our articles. And here what we are doing, we are using our model artists.all to get a list of our articles. And here we are sending our documents back, or we are throwing an error. And we are doing exactly the same here everywhere by using our model inside the controller. And now let's look on our model. Here we have a model which is also just a bunch of functions that we wrote ourselves. And here we're using our DB, this is our MongoDB, and we're making different requests. For example, get collection artists to get a list of our artists. Here we also find element by ID, we create it here, update, and so on. And here is how it's working. So here I started our web server. Now I can jump inside Postman. And for example, I am just looking on post request on localhost /artists. And here is our body. So we actually want to create here an artist with name test. I'm hitting here send. And as you can see, we created a new record. And here we are getting our name and the ID of our artist. So this is our basic REST API for our artists that we want to convert to GraphQL API in this video. So as you can see in our package.json now we have just 3 packages: Express, this is our framework, body parser to work with body, and MongoDB database. And we're leaving everything as it is, but here we must install 2 additional packages. First of all, GraphQL package, and secondly, GraphQL Express package, which is a binding to Express, and it is working really amazing out of the box. This is why here I want to jump to console and write yarn add, and here we have first of all our GraphQL, and secondly express-GraphQL. I'm hitting enter and we're installing these 2 packages. As you can see now we're ready, we installed them both here in our package.json, and we now can configure GraphQL inside our server.js. The main idea is that we won't change our server.js at all, and we will leave all this REST API in place. Additionally to this, we will create a new route for our GraphQL requests. So this is one of the benefits that we are getting out of the box. We have just a single route /GraphQL typically that we are using across the whole application. So we won't create hundreds of different routes for every single request, which is already awesome. So what we must do here on the top, we must, after body parser for example, add here a destructuring of GraphQL. Now here we want to require our express-GraphQL, and this is exactly our additional package that we used to bind GraphQL to our Express. Now here we can add one more app use where we want to create our GraphQL server. So inside the use we must provide first of all our URL, and it will be GraphQL. And this is a typical name of our GraphQL server. Now here as a second parameter we are calling our GraphQL HTTP, and now here inside we must provide an object. And inside this object we need several things. First of all, it will be schema, and we will talk about it a little bit later because this is the core point of our GraphQL route. The next thing that I want to add here is pretty true. In this case, all our requests, when we're making GraphQL requests, will be prettified, and this is really nice to see them prettified. And the last thing that we need here is GraphQLi true, and this is where all this magic is happening. This is the best tool possible that I can imagine while working with API, and I will show you this GraphQLi tool in a second. So as you can see, it is extremely easy to bind GraphQL to our Express server. It is just several lines and usage of GraphQL HTTP. Now our next point is to create this schema, because this is exactly where all our code about GraphQL will go. For this I will add here on the top our schema, and this is just an import of require, and let's create here a file that we will call schema. Now let's create this file. So here just inside root I will create schema.js where we will pack all our stuff regarding GraphQL. So what we want to do here, we want to export, so module exports, our GraphQL schema. And for this we are writing new GraphQL schema, and I'm hitting enter. And as you can see, my editor made an autocomplete here on the top. We need to destructure GraphQL schema from package GraphQL. And this is exactly what we wanted. If your editor didn't do that, then you need to add this line on the top. And now inside this GraphQL schema, we are writing 2 things. First of all, we have here query, and secondly, we have here a mutation. Typically, people create here a variable which is called root query, and here we are calling mutation as root mutation. So what is query and what is mutation? Actually, query means that we are just getting some data. For example, getting a list of articles or getting a single user. When we are talking about mutation, we are talking about changing our data. For example, updating a user or creating a user or maybe deleting a user. This is how we typically split this stuff. Now let's create here a root query. So for this I simply create root query as a variable and I call here new GraphQL, and here we're writing object type. And this is a function where inside I must provide an object. And inside we're creating a name where we're providing a query. Also here we must have a property fields, and it is an object where we pack all our requests, which actually means here inside fields, this is an object, and let's say that we want to get a list of our artists. This is why here I can create any key that I want, and it will be the name of our request. In our case, if we are getting the list of artists, I can name it, for example, artists, and this is also an object. Now here we must specify what this request is giving us back, and we can write here type equals, and here just for test let's write GraphQL boolean. So we are saying that here we must return a boolean property, and after this we have a resolve function, which is actually just a function that must return some data, and let's just write here return true, so we can test this request. But it is not enough because we also must create a root mutation. And actually this is exactly the copy-paste of root query because it is also packed inside GraphQL object. So here I can name it root mutation. The name here will be mutation. And here I will remove all fields because for now we don't have any of them. So once again, here we must return our new GraphQL schema. This is a schema of GraphQL where inside we will create all our requests. And we're creating here query and mutation, which is root query and root mutation. And inside query, we're packing inside fields all our requests, and inside mutation, we will pack all our mutations. For now, we don't have any mutations, and we have just a single field artist. Now let's try to restart our web server and check if we have any errors. As you can see, we don't have any errors, and now we want to start GraphQLi. So I will jump to the browser, and here I am in localhost 3012, this is my port, /GraphQL, and I'm hitting enter. And as you can see, we're getting this nice tool here. The most interesting part is that here inside server.js, we wrote app use GraphQL. This is why here we're getting both post request for /GraphQL. This is how you are doing all your requests to GraphQL. And secondly, we're getting a get request, which is this GraphQLi tool. And this is exactly option to enable it. And this is how it is looking like, and this is the best tool possible. It helps us to understand what request we are covering and how we can make some requests to our backend, and it validates all this data. But as you can see here on the right, we are getting an error. Type mutation must define one or more fields, which actually means here inside our schema, we didn't define any field and it can't really work. This is why just for test I will copy this artist here inside. It doesn't do anything, and I will just rename it to create artist and leave it like this. So for now we just want to make our GraphQL server working. Now I want to restart our web server again because we don't have any daemon here, and we must restart our web server with every change, and now we can reload our page again. And as you can see now on the right, we don't have any errors, and we can click here docs link. And as you can see here, we're getting two things. We're getting here query and mutation. We can click on the query, which is our root query. And as you can see here, we have our fields, and we see here all our requests. And we see, okay, we have an artist request, and it must return boolean. This is why here now on the left, we can try this request. And as you can see, there are lots of examples. We can remove it for now. And now I can write here query. And as you can see, I'm getting a really nice autocompletion. And if your autocompletion is working, it means that you installed everything correctly. So here I'm writing query and then brackets. And inside I can write artist. And as you can see, it is all autocompleted based on our API, which actually means you can't really write here something which does not exist. You will see it immediately. And here we want to make a request for our artist, and here I am just hitting play. And as you can see, here is our response. We're getting an object with data artist true. And this is exactly this code that we wrote here. We just resolved this root query artist with true, and we returned here boolean. And actually we successfully implemented our first route with GraphQL, because as you can see here, it is working in browser. And this GraphQLi tool is super nice, because first of all, in comparison to REST API, you see all your queries here on the right and all your mutations. For example, here I see, okay, I have just a single field, create artist. Secondly, I can test here every single request. I have here history, prettify, everything that I want. So this is a super powerful tool to work with GraphQL. So first of all, what we're getting from GraphQL is documentation out of the box, and this is what you see on the right, and you don't have this when you're talking about REST API. Secondly, here you can't really do a mistake. If I'm writing here something like artist, we directly see an inline validation cannot query field on type query, did you mean artist? This is extremely helpful, and it really helps you to debug things faster. So now we can start to move our API from REST to GraphQL. And our first request is this field artist, which must return for us a list of our artists. And actually, as you already saw here, we must type what we will get back. And this is awesome because it is going in TypeScript direction where you are typing what you are getting from the backend. This is why typically what we want to do inside GraphQL, we want to define our entities that we are getting back or what we are sending to the backend. This is why here on the top, before our root mutation, I want to create a new data type. And we want to create here an artist type. This is why here let's name it artist type. And here we're using new GraphQL object type, just like we did previously. Now inside we can provide a name, in our case it will be artist, and it really helps to see in GraphQLi what we're talking about. And after a name here we must provide fields, exactly like we did here in mutation and query, but in this case here we're just defining what fields are possible inside our artist. And inside previous REST API we had just an ID and a name, and our ID was with underscore because we are talking about MongoDB here, and all IDs inside MongoDB is with underscore. So here this is an object with field type, and here we're saying new GraphQL non-null, and inside we're passing GraphQL ID. So this is something new that we didn't use previously. As you saw here, we just put inside type GraphQL boolean, but actually here it means that we're returning this type. When we're talking about field of our entity, for example an artist, in this case we can define if these fields can be null or not. And as you see here, I said that it can't be null because here I used new GraphQL not null GraphQL ID. This means that this is a GraphQL ID and it can never be null. It must be defined there. Also, as you can see, my editor auto-completed everything and here imported it on the top. If your editor didn't do that, then you must write it by hand. For example, GraphQL non-null and GraphQL ID. And here we successfully created our first field. Now we must create one more field, which is a name. And here we are providing also a type inside, which also will be GraphQL not null, because we don't want to make it nullable, and inside we will have a string. This is why here will be GraphQL string, and we also auto-imported it here on the top. So this is how we typically define our entity. We have a name, fields, and here inside every single property we are defining type. And it can be just a type, then it can be null, or you can wrap it with new GraphQL non-null, and in this case it will never be null, and you will get an error if you will try to get it like this. Now let's jump back to our request artists, and as you can see here we returned type GraphQL boolean, and this is of course wrong. What we must do here, we must write new GraphQL, and here we have a list. And actually when we want to return an array, we must wrap our entity with new GraphQL list, and inside in our case we are writing artist type, and this is exactly what we created here on the top. So we are saying here that we are getting an array which is artist type. Now we need to tune our resolve method, and actually typically we are doing our resolve async because we are making here asynchronous request to our database. Now I want to open our controllers artist, and this is exactly all our methods that we want to reuse. And actually here we are talking now about all method, and this is exactly the code that we want to copy paste. So here we have try catch, and we are getting a list of our documents which are all our artists, and we are sending them back. In other case we are throwing an error if we are getting some error here. This is why here I want to copy paste this try catch and just paste here inside the resolve. Now I also want to remove here return true because we don't need it anymore. And we also must copy-paste this import of model artists because we want to reuse it inside our GraphQL. Because as I said earlier, GraphQL doesn't have anything to do with database. This is why our ORM or maybe model is staying the same. This is just some middleware between a frontend and our database. This is why here I want to import our artists, which is require model artist. And actually be careful here because we must change the path. Here we had inside controllers the import with 2 dots, and here now we have just 1 dot because we are inside the root directory. So here we pasted our try catch. Do we need to change it? And actually yes, because here we don't have resend like we had it inside plain express. We must just return here our data. This is why I can directly return here a weight of artists all, because here we are getting our array of the artists. Now let's talk about catch. We don't have here next, and we actually must just throw an arrow. So I really like to throw here a new arrow and pass inside arrow.message. In this case we will see what problem we have. Now let's restart our web server and check if it's working. As you can see, we don't have any errors and we are jumping to our GraphQL, and here we are getting an error message. Fields artist of type artist must have a selection of subfields. Actually, it means that here inside artists, we must put brackets and write inside what fields we want to get back. And actually, this is one more wonderful feature of GraphQL. Here we can specify not all fields, but just what we need. And this is there out of the box. If you want to implement something like this inside REST API, you must provide the list of the fields that you want to get. Here you must do it by default. In this case here we are writing that we are getting back an ID and our name. And as you can see, this is autocomplete, so you can't really type it wrong. Now here I am hitting play and we are getting our data back. And actually you will probably get here an empty array because you don't have any data inside your database. If you want to create it, you can still use REST API like /artist, post request here, just inside Postman, and you are hitting send, or we will implement creating of the artist in several minutes. So as you can see here, we have our list, and here we are specifying inside every single field that we want to get for our artist. For example, if we want to just get our names, we just remove ID, and we are getting the array of objects with just name. And this is extremely efficient. Also, our documentation was automatically updated. This is why here we can jump inside our query, and here we have artist, and we see here that we are getting back an array of artist. Now we click on artist, and we see all fields of our artist entity. Now let's implement our second request, and this is getting artist by ID. So here what I want to create is new field with the name artist, because we are getting a single artist. And first of all here we must provide a type, and our type will be artist type. We already created it, and this is just a single artist. But it is not all. Here we have something new. We have here a property which is called args, which means arguments. And actually to get an artist by ID we must provide an ID, which means we have a dynamic parameter. And in this case inside GraphQL we have args. So here we can say that we must provide an ID. This is an object with type which is new, GraphQL not null, because this is a mandatory. In other case we can't really do this request, and we are passing inside GraphQL ID. So as you can see, the logic is exactly the same. We're writing here new GraphQL not null and the type of data that we want to pass. In our case this is GraphQL ID. Now after args we must create our resolve function just like we did on the top, and this is an asynchronous function where inside we will write our code. But now actually the question is how we can get these arguments from the request inside our resolve function. So first of all here we're getting root property, and in this video I won't talk about root property because it is not needed for our application and it is more advanced stuff. This is why here I will just put underscore to ignore this property. And second property is actually arguments, so inside these arguments we will get our ID. Now inside I want to copy paste our logic from controller artist, and this is find by ID. So I just copy this try catch and put it here. Now here we have our try and we don't need resend. This is why here I will directly return a weight artist find by ID. But now here we are using request params ID, we don't have it anymore. Now we have here args.id because actually here inside arguments we said that we will get an ID and it is mandatory. And if we are getting an error, then we can just throw it, and I will copy paste the throw from the top. and now we also must remove this return next, we don't need it. Now let's check if it's working. I will reload our web server and here jump inside GraphQL. We must reload the page, and as you can see inside query, we now have an artist which get as an argument an ID, and we can see all this here inside documentation, which is really nice. Now to try this request, you must have an ID. If you don't have it yet, then you will get it in the next step when we will implement create artist. So what I want to write here is artist request, and as you can see here it is read like this, because here we must provide an argument ID of type ID. This is why here we put round brackets, and here is autocomplete ID equals, and here I am pasting our ID. But it must be obviously a string, because this is a MongoDB ID. And now here we must provide object and specify what we want to get back, for example underscore ID and the name. Now I'm hitting enter, and as you can see we are getting a nice response with our article from database. So we successfully implemented all our queries, and now we are coming to mutations, and actually it will be super similar. And as you can see here, we must implement create, update and delete. And our first request is create artist, the name is fine, but the type is not fine. What we want to provide here back is obviously an artist, what we created. This is why here we can write type artist type, this is what we are getting back. But also here we must provide our arguments, because here we must provide a body with some data to create this artist. And actually we also want to type it correctly, because we want to show what data we need inside GraphQL. This is why here I want to write that we are getting artist as an argument, and inside we have our type, new GraphQL not null, and inside we want to create a new type, artist input type. So what is the difference between artist type and artist input type? And you can already get it. Artist type is exactly our entity inside backend, inside database, but artist input type is what we are providing from outside, for example from our frontend. And now we must create this artist input type. And actually for this I will copy paste fully our artist type, because it will be almost the same. So we must name it artist input type, and here the name will be artist input, and it also stay like GraphQL object type, and inside field we don't need an ID, because ID is generated on the backend, and we are providing from the frontend only a name. So here we have name, and it must be mandatory in this case, because it is also mandatory later inside the backend. So as you can see, our input type is looking almost the same like normal entity type, and we can just define it like this. And as you can see here inside our mutation, we defined that inside argument we must provide not just some GraphQL string like name, but we must provide here an artist, which is exactly the type artist input type. Now here we must define our resolve function, and this is an asynchronous function where we are getting as a first argument underscore, so we are ignoring it, and now here we are getting our args, just like we did here inside our request for the artist. It is looking exactly the same. Now I want to jump inside controllers and copy paste here create. So I will just copy this try catch and paste it here inside resolve and remove here return. So as you can see here, we are first creating our artist with the name. We don't need it anymore, because here we are getting the full artist that we need inside args. So we must write here args.artist, and here we don't need const doc, because we can directly return the response of our database. And now inside catch we must write throw new error, and inside I want to provide error.message, and now we can remove our return. Now let's try if it's working. I will reload our web server and jump to GraphQL. And actually, as you can see here, we are getting an object. The type of mutation create artist must be input type, but got artist input. So actually here I made a mistake. When we are defining artist input type or any input type, we must write here not GraphQL object type, but GraphQL input object type. And this is extremely important. And obviously on the top, we must auto import it. Let's reload web server once again and check if it's working. As you can see now here we don't have any errors. We can open our documentation. Here is our mutation, create artist, and here as an argument we are providing artist, which is artist input. And here we can click on it and see what we must provide. This is just a name, but actually this bang means that it is mandatory. Let's try this now. So instead of query, we are writing here mutation. Now we're opening brackets and writing here create artist. Now here we directly see two errors. First of all, we must have a subfield, and secondly, we have an argument. So we must provide here an artist, and actually this is an object with field name. And again, we are getting nice autocomplete. So let's create here an artist with the name GraphQL. And now after this, we must put brackets and provide a list of fields that we want to get back. For example, an ID and a name. Now let's hit play and check if it's working. And as you can see here, this is our new created artist. So we are getting here new generated ID and our name GraphQL, which actually means we successfully implemented creating of our artist. Now let's implement updating of our artist, and actually it will be super similar. This is why I will copy paste create artist completely and just put it here after. So we want to name this field update artist. And what we are doing here, first of all, we are getting back our updated artist. This is completely fine. As an argument here, we can still get our artist, and actually artist input type is sufficient, because here we just updated our name. This is totally fine. But also here we must provide an ID of the record that we need to update. In this case here, I must write ID, which is an object, and inside I must provide a type, and it will be new, GraphQL not null, and here we are getting GraphQL ID. Now here inside our resolve function, we must use not artist create, but artist update. And actually artist update also give us an updated record back. And inside we must provide not only args artist, but as a first argument args.id, because in this case we are providing what element we want to update, and here is what data we want to update inside. And our throw is staying the same. Let's check this out. I'm reloading web server. Now we're reloading the page. We don't have any errors. And here in the documentation, we can see that we have our update artist. So to change our create artist to update artist, first of all, we must change the name. And secondly, here we must provide also an ID. So I'm just writing here ID equals, and here will be our string that I copy pasted from the right. I'm hitting here play, and as you can see, it works. So first of all, here we have more arguments, but our fields are staying the same, and here we're using our update artist, and our artist was successfully updated. And actually here we can try to change our name to see that it is really working, and yes, it is working. And the last method that we want to implement is deleting of our artist. So I already copy-pasted update artist, and now I want to just put it directly underneath, because it will be super similar. Here we need to name it delete artist, and actually what we are getting back, we are not getting our artist because we removed it. This is why typically you want to have here a boolean. So we can write here GraphQL boolean. Now here as an argument, we don't need to provide our artist input type, we need just to provide an ID that we need to remove. And yes, it must be not null, because this is mandatory for this request. And here inside our result, we are getting our arguments with ID inside, and I want inside try to call our artist.delete, and inside we are just providing args.id. The most important part that the response of artist delete is the response of MongoDB, and this is not exactly the format that we want to. This is why here I just want without return to write await, so we are waiting until deletion, and now after this I will simply return true to say that it was removed. Now let's reload our web server and check if it's working. So I'm reloading the page. Now here we have our delete artist. And here we don't need to provide our artist, but we just need an ID. And this is why we are getting here an error. Artist is an unknown argument here. And we don't actually need to provide anything back as a field, because here it will be true and it doesn't have any fields. This is why here I will hit play, and as you can see we are getting back our delete artist, true, which means our record was successfully removed. And actually we can easily check this, because here we have history, and here on the left we can see the history of our request, and we are interested of getting an artist by ID, and here I loaded it, and now changed this ID. Now here I am hitting play, and we are getting artist null, because we successfully removed it from our database. As you can see, GraphQL is an extremely powerful tool to work and build APIs. And actually, if you're interested to learn how we built exactly the same project, but with MongoDB and REST API, don't forget to check this video also.